was invited to this.
In the very early 70s, things were changing.
1970s feminism inspired gay women, and gay women inspired 1970s feminism. Lesbians began to make themselves more visible, challenging the expectations of the scone-nibbling ladies of Scotland in the process. Feminist sexual emancipation had yet to reach the small towns of 1970s Scotland. To be a lesbian was to be a target for relentless harassment and abuse.
I'm living actually in fear of being attacked, because I was attacked a few times.
There's a lot of being spat on.
Not for being
when
a
you go down
lesbian.
the stairwell during class changes, there'd often be people positioned at the top waiting for me. So I often have my hair covered in spit.
Of course, you'll get the people who'll say to you that within every lesbian is a man. What would you say to that?
Rubbish. Men see them, they either want to ask them if they want to have a threesome, they want to insult them, because men are saying, why am I not in this equation?
It's not normal, it's not healthy, and it is a phase, and I will grow out of it.
Hit that be like.
1980s was the decade when the gays went to town. Martina Navratilova won Wimbledon. Frankie said, relax. And in Scotland's big cities, the newly legalized gay culture began to have a fabulous time. In Glasgow, the gay mecca was Bennett's.
Ha!
I remember really clearly when I first went to Bennett, and I just thought, I couldn't even have imagined a place like this existed. I mean, I'd not even seen a gay club in film or on television.
There were stockbrokers and bus drivers, leather guys, there were guys in suits. It was all about finding a sense of community and sex and just freedom, basically.
Vile.
In Edinburgh, Fire Island was home to disco queens and homosexual hedonism.
People like Divine and Eartha Kitt in her disco incarnation came to play that club, and I do remember up at the back of the crowd while Divine was performing on stage, some policeman's son, who was my thing at the time, sucking my cock while Divine's doing her act in it.
The past weekend should have been a time of outright celebration for Britain's homosexual community, as a march through London ended Gay Pride Week, 7 days in which they commemorated the start of the gay liberation movement. However, the festivities were overshadowed by fear of a mysterious new disease that has hit the homosexual community in America and has now come here.
Reports of an awful mysterious disease killing homosexual men began to emerge from gay communities around the world.
They talked about the idea that it was made up, that it was a form of prejudice, it was a discriminatory thing that straight people were making up, and it wasn't actually true.
There is now a danger that has become a threat to us all.
Mum and Dad in the living room, and then Mum made some crack about, oh, that's what the gays get.
293. 244 of those victims were male homosexuals.
The Scottish capital was labelled the HIV capital of Europe.
Edinburgh, the AIDS capital of Europe, was written in some newspaper.
By the end of the century, there won't be one family in the United Kingdom that isn't touched in some way by this disease.
With little information and a lot of fear, Scotland's homosexual community were once again stigmatized. In 1986, 10 homosexual men were reported to have died of AIDS in Scotland. In 1990, it was 24. In 1991, it was 47.
By the late 80s, people were dying on a pretty regular basis, and it was pretty devastating.
When I wake up, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you.
Life-saving combination therapy arrived in 1996. Now with medication, most HIV-positive people are no longer infectious and can expect to live as long as anyone else.
Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay.
Section 28 prohibited the teaching of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. What they meant by pretended family relationships was vague, and teachers risked breaking the law if they acknowledged that gay love was possible.
Section 28 basically said you cannot talk about non-heterosexual relationships at school.
Obviously don't want children taught that the gay and lesbian lifestyle is natural or normal. It is not, it never has been, and it never will be.
Because you're such a catch.
What we were stopping people from doing was talking about hardcore sexual acts and explaining them in graphic detail and maybe putting on a porno or something in schools. Obviously not.
The idea that you can talk about pretended family relationships, that's a deeply offensive thing.
So it literally meant that funding for things for switchboards, help, community centres, plays that were maybe trying to raise awareness about homophobia, all these things, they all got their funding cut, everything got shut down, closed, and that was just horrendous.
They even crashed the 6 o'clock news.
Yeah.
In the House of Lords, a vote is
Good on
taking
them.
place now
Good
on
on
a
them.
challenge to the poll tax. Tory rebels.
But it was vulnerable gay teenage kids at school in the 1980s and 90s who suffered.
I came out to my guidance teachers, and when I eventually actually told them that I was gay, when I'd stopped denying it and I actually, used those words, and they said, "We can't talk to you about this." I said, "What do you mean, you can't talk to you? Talk to me about everything else, why can't you talk to me about this?" And he said, "We can't talk to you about this because of a piece of legislation called Section 28.
In 1999, Scotland entered a new era with the re-establishment of the Scottish Parliament. One of its first acts was to repeal Clause 28. But a businessman and born-again Christian called Brian Souter didn't fancy this vision of Scotland, nor did the biggest selling Scottish newspaper, nor the major religions.
I hesitate to use the word perversion, but let's face up to the truth of this situation. That's what it is.
And in just about every window, there was these, keep the clause, save our children, and I felt hated, I felt despised, I felt like a Jew walking down the street and seeing swastikas.
The boss of Stagecoach, millionaire Brian Souter, says he's going to pay for a private referendum in Scotland on the repeal of Section 28.
Souter held his unofficial referendum, but the Parliament held its nerve.
More than 1 million people opposed repeal in a ballot privately funded by the wealthy businessman Brian Souter, but the majority didn't vote.
And despite the fury of the Daily Record, the result was an irrelevance. Then in June 2000, Clause 28 was finally removed from Scots law. The millennium, Scottish attitudes to homosexuality have changed dramatically. Surveys find that 2/3 of Scots now actively approve of equal marriage. And more than ever, it's homophobia that's taboo.
Well, hello there, darling. You've never been in a gay bar in Scotland before? Follow me. It's just gay guys dancing to Cher and Madonna, dancing and dance to Cher. And that just never happened.
In 2005, the Scottish Parliament legislated for civil partnerships for gay couples. In 2006, same-sex couples were given the right to adopt. In 2014, at the opening of the Commonwealth Games, our country was being beamed out across the world to an audience of millions. And Scotland happily promoted its new openness with a kilted gay kiss.
That so many people out there take completely for granted the idea that if they find the love of their life, then they can marry them. But it wasn't an offer to me. It was something that I never grew up thinking I would be able to have.
Yes, 105. No, 18. There were no abstentions. And the Marriage and Civil Partnership Scotland Bill is passed.
In the first 6 months of 2015, over 1,250 same-sex couples have got married in Scotland. And men marrying men and women marrying women has become an everyday event. This year, a European human rights monitor called the Rainbow Alliance classed Scotland as the best country in Europe for LGBTI equality.
Stephen, how does it feel? It feels lovely. I'm going to cry.
My heart was wrapped up in clothes.
Wow. That was good. It's nice to hear about the history of gay people in Scotland. As some of you viewers won't know, Scotland is always behind. A lot of these things got revoked in England years and years before they did in Scotland, like clause 28, like lots of things, consent age and stuff like that. So let me know what you thought in the comments. Did you watch it all? I'm trying my new webcam thing instead of the OBS one I usually use, just to see it's different. So anyway, please subscribe, please hit the ding bell, which is notifications. I don't know how to do my Patreon, so if you know how to do that, give me a message. You also notice I'm a wee bit slow sometimes. That's my autism. Just let me catch up. Cheers. Thanks very much.